Hello, welcome to another episode of Crushed Custard. Now today we're going to look back at a review that I wrote back in 2008. A review of a band from the 70s, a band that not many people will probably remember. And the piece, when I wrote it, was initially called Fancy, a forgotten band of the 70s reviewed. And that is the band we're talking about, a band called Fancy. Fancy are another one of those long-lost gems of the 70s, a virtually unheard-of British band that was almost created by accident and yet enjoyed the success of 2 top 20 singles in America. The story, for all it's worth, goes something like this. Producer Mike Hurst decided in 1973 that what the world really needed was a remake of the Trogs hit Wild Thing, but with a difference. Calling in his favourite guitarist of the time, one Ray Fenwick, formerly of the Spencer Davis Group and the T-Set, he soon sold him on the idea of using a raunchy female vocal. This vocal arrived in the form of Helen Caunt, who was a former Penthouse pet, who rather than actually singing the lyric, actually breathed it provocatively. This added to Fenwick and formerly Affinity man Mo Foster's suggestive and almost orgasmic guitar and bass gave the desired effect. On presenting the finished record to Atlantic Records under the moniker Fancy, they were both informed that its overt suggestiveness would almost certainly lead to a radio ban and any chance of success would be lost. However, they did release it without any promotion at all, and somehow a copy of it made its way to the US. It was eventually released in America on an Atlantic subsidiary label called Big Tree, and 10 months after its recording, it started a 4-month run in the top 100, peaking at number 17. Now, this left Hurst and Fenwick with something of a problem, as they now had a US hit credited to a band called Fancy, but there was, of course, no such band. Re-recruiting Foster and adding future Judas Priest man Les Binks on the drum stool, they set about finding a female singer, as Caunt was not really suitable for a proper band. After trying out several singers, including Carol Grimes and Sonia Christina from Curved Air, they settled on former Steely Dan backing vocalist Annie Kavanagh. They quickly recorded another single, Touch Me, this time obviously with Kavanagh on vocals. Now, possibly due to the success of the first single, this one also raced up the charts to an impressive number 19. Subsequently, on the strength of these 2 hits, they toured the US and recorded more tracks to make up an album. Now, that album was the first Fancy album, which was called Wild Thing and was released in 1974. Now, this is a powerful, funky blues rock album with Annie Kavanagh giving a vocal performance of the highest quality, particularly on the tracks Love for Sale and US Surprise. The initial single Wild Thing was kept in its original form with the original Caunt vocal, but all of the other tracks were recorded with Kavanagh on vocals, except for the Ray Fenwick song tracks Move On and Between the Devil and Me. The original B-side, which was a track called Fancy, was bizarrely not included. Most of the tracks were Hurst-Fenwick penned compositions, but along with Wild Thing there are also other covers on the album, including the Elvis hit One Night and the Lieber and Stoller track I'm a Woman. The second hit single, Touch Me, was also included. Ray Fenwick, as ever, plays superb guitar and shows why he was such a sought-after session performer. In fact, it was during the existence of Fancy that he played on Roger Glover's Butterfly Ball. He also played on John Lord's Windows and eventually became the guitarist in the Ian Gillan Band, thus ensuring his place in the Deep Purple family. Unsurprisingly, as the rest of the album was so different to the hit singles, it did not fare so well in the charts and quickly headed into the bargain bins, despite the good reviews it received at the time. The second and final Fancy album was called Turns You On, but it was actually called Something to Remember in the UK in time to tie in with a major tour in support of 10cc. Whilst the first album had the 2 hit singles on it, this follow-up was a far more straightforward, out-and-out funky blues rock record with no real pretensions to the singles market. Even so, the opening track, She's Riding the Rock Machine, was given a release on a 45. Predictably, it flopped, as the almost novelty value of the single Wild Thing from the previous album was now but a distant memory. Fancy had in fact suffered from the fact that they were just far too good a band for what was expected of them. In the UK, 10cc fans were apparently overwhelmed by the professionalism of the support band, whilst that the album was so far removed from the hit singles that it was met with nothing more than mild disinterest, which is really unfair because it's another mighty fine album. The album itself was far bluesier than its predecessor and featured songs that were fewer in number but greater in length. This of course gave more time to highlight the talents of guitarist Ray Fenwick, but also gave vocalist Annie Kavanagh the chance to indulge herself in a couple of lengthy, magnificent performances. The opening track, She's Riding the Rock Machine, is a classic piece of mid-70s funk rock that would grace anyone's collection. This is followed by a superb rendition of I Was Made to Love Him, on which Kavanagh gives the performance of a lifetime, proving that she was more than a match for many of her contemporaries. The track Something to Remember suffers some rather dodgy lyrics which would be certainly frowned upon today, but the album closer, Stop, and the lengthy Mose Allison track Everybody's Crying Mercy, along with You've Been in Love Too Long, keep the quality really high. This just leaves the autobiographical track The Tour Song, which is another nice mid-70s funk rocker that tells the tale of their unlikely existence. So, that was Fancy. 2 mighty fine funky blues rock albums and a couple of novelty US hit singles. They surely deserved a far better fate. Ray Fenwick went on to be a founding member of the Ian Gillan Band and Forcefield, as well as continuing as a much sought after session player. He was also responsible for the theme tune to the UK 70s children's TV programme Magpie, which was considered by many to be a much cooler version of the BBC's Blue Peter. Mo Foster returned to the world of sessions, working with Phil Collins, Meat Loaf, Gary Moore and Cliff Richard among others, and Les Binks joined Judas Priest. Annie Kavanagh got married and went to Australia. Sadly though, she seems to have dropped from the music scene altogether, although of course having got married, she may well now be performing under a different name. Now that piece was originally written and published in January 2008. Now on the back of that, I received some correspondence from Annie Kavanagh, the singer in the band, which I will now read out and tell you what she said. This came from Annie in November 2015, so it was a good 7 years after this original review had actually been published. Martin, I just saw this review. I'm so grateful you gave this band such a positive rave. I left the band, as you stated, and moved back to Australia, where I'm still gigging and working as a vocal coach and a university lecturer on voice. I loved that time with Fancy. It was thrilling and a privilege to be involved in such an exciting musical era. Just wanted to let you know that I didn't drop off the planet. Kindest regards, Annie Kavanagh, now Neil. In response to other comments on the blog, Annie also replied, I've never stopped gigging and I'm now a lecturer of contemporary voice at WAAPA, Western Australia. Another reader asked her if she'd made any more records, and she said, yes, I've made a live blues album which I recorded here in Australia. Another person then asked, what cities in the US did Fancy tour in back in the mid-70s? I would have given anything to have seen them live. Annie Kavanagh's reply was, I can't remember all, but Chicago, Detroit, LA, New York, Texas, all over the place basically. It was a fantastic time. As I've been working in a theatre in the West End, this was something very different and exciting. I love the guys in the band and stay in touch with all of them, and recently reconnected with Les Binks. So there you go, that's the story of Fancy, and also a nice little bit of a message at the end from Annie Kavanagh Neil. I'll endeavour to put a link, if I can, in the description section so you can maybe hear some of these songs. Whether these albums are still available, I don't know. They were released as a double package on Angel Air back in 2008. They may well be out of print now, but if you can pick one up in the second-hand market anywhere, I would strongly advise you to give them a go. Well, there you go. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Crushed Custard, and I'll see you all again next time.